Hi, how are you? Welcome to another class of Unreal Engine 5. I would like to show you in this class other ways to correct some elements that we corrected in 3D Studio Max. For example, do you remember that by using 3D Studio Max, we corrected the mapping in 1 meter for 1 meter for 1 meter. We corrected the pivot. We aligned the pivot in the center of the object. And we also learned how to invert the normal of the object. But if in case you don't use 3ds Max, if you use the SketchUp, Blender, Maya, if it's possible, it's really cool that you apply the concepts that we saw in the 3D Studio Max class to the software that you're using, okay? But if, for example, some features are not available on the softwares that you're using, like Blender, Maya, SketchUp, for example, there's the possibility of adjusting some things directly on Unreal. So we will learn how to adjust 3 things directly on Unreal Engine. One of the things is to adjust the pivot, the position of the pivot, and the mapping 1 for 1 for 1, and invert the normal, okay? Nice. So let's get started with the more simple, that is adjust the mapping in 1 for 1 for 1. I already applied here a modifier UVW map, okay, to let the texture out of proportion. So you can see that it's measuring 6 meters here, 40 centimeters, and 2.5 meters in the vertical. Okay, so the texture is out of proportion. If I take out the UVW map, it looks like it's in the proportion, and it's not cool. So let's leave it out of the proportion. Okay, I'm gonna convert to polygon because it's gonna exit the modifier UVW map. It's already applied here, but it's not to show here. Okay, let's suppose in your software that you're using this wall here that you're modeling, you want to apply a mapping 1 for 1 for 1. Remember that it's not only for the wall. You can repeat this process, for example, for armchairs, and you can transform this into mapping 1 for 1 for 1, or for any other object. Okay, we're gonna use the wall as an example because I think it's easier. Okay, I'm gonna export this. Look, for our project. All right, here I'm gonna export here FBX. I'm gonna create a folder here called mapping, UV mapping. All right, and I'm gonna save this here, wall UV. Okay, I exported in FBX, and you can also have the possibility to export in FBX in the software that you're using. I'm going to import here. We already learned how to import the models. FBX, UV mapping, wall. We don't want the night. All right, let's see. Let's just import. Nice. Let's take to the scene. All right, here is our wall. As you can see, the mapping, it's out of proportion, okay? So it's not configured in 1 for 1 for 1, as we saw in 3ds Max. That is cool to come to Unreal, the mapping 1 for 1 for 1. But for example, if you don't have the Studio Max in your computer, or in the tool that you're used to use, also there is not this feature in like mapping 1 for 1 for 1. We can do it inside Unreal. We can adjust the mapping at UV, okay, here. So basically here, click here, modeling, okay. We have access to some tools of modeling inside Unreal Engine 5. Obviously, in this moment, it's not that great. We don't have all the resources like in 3ds Max or in the software that you're used to work, but there are some features that are really useful. For example, to correct the UV. Let's go UV here, project. Here, you can realize that it has corrected a little bit the mapping, but we can adjust a little more. For example, what's the type, the projection type you can choose? You see this? Cylinder, you know, it transforms into a cylinder, as in Studio Max, for example, or this one. In our case, we want the projection type of the type box. Okay, and we can adjust the dimensions. By default is this, all right, the 25. It recognizes the dimension of the geometry. We can enlarge, all right. We can change this here, 25 it was. Here we can adjust, okay, or 100. And the height we can put like this. So the value that is cool for us, for walls, for example, or mapping, it's like 1 for 1 for 1, okay? As we are working centimeters, 100 for 100 for 100 centimeters, okay? This way, the mapping of your channel UV now is 1 for 1 for 1. That's really good, mainly when you're going to work with walls inside Unreal Engine. Okay, nice. And you just click here, accept. All right. Yeah, so our model now is mapped in 1 for 1 for 1. And it's not only the model in the scene, but also the model here in the content. It adjusts in the original model. Okay, so every time you add this object to the scene, it's gonna be considering the mapping that you corrected. Nice. All right, besides the mapping UV that we can correct on Unreal Engine, we can also adjust the pivot, okay? 2 ways. Let's see. I'm gonna bring here the chair. We saw in 3ds Max that mainly furnitures, it's interesting to take the model aligned in the 0 of the world, okay? I'm gonna press G here to isolate this. Our chair, it's aligned here in the center of the world. I'm going to put it here. All right, it's not in the center of the world anymore. Let's export in FBX, okay? Let's create a folder here. All right, let's see. I'm going to delete these elements. And I'm going to call it chair. Let's import. I think there is one element here. Okay, I deleted this. Import. Let's see. FBX. All right, let's see the chair. Everything's okay here. Nice. And let's click and drag to the scene. As we saw, the pivot is out of the correct position, and that's bad, okay? Because if you're gonna rotate or position your object in some place, some specific place, because the pivot is out of the center, mainly for the furnitures. How can we correct this inside Unreal Engine? Well, let me delete this here again. One of the ways is when we import. For example, you can import your chair, and you can uncheck this option here, transform vertex to absolute, okay? And import this. Nice. And put in the scene. Look at this. It didn't consider the position where the pivot came of the 0 of the word. It considered the position of the pivot here in this position. But what does this consider to bring the pivot here? Well, possibly during the modeling of this armchair on the software where it was modeled, the pivot or the model was built from this position here. So Unreal Engine understands the position where the model was built. Maybe it was built this element after this, and then it was attached to the other, and it considered this position here. Okay, this is one of the ways to zero the position of the pivot inside Unreal Engine, but you can see that it's not very efficient, because in this case of this module specifically, that during the modeling, Unreal understood that the pivot of this, it was from here, from this position, it came to the scene in the wrong way, and every time I'll have to adjust the position. So that's not really efficient, okay? Another way to correct this inside Unreal Engine, I'm gonna remove here, let's see, let's delete this. Let's import again. And let's check this option, just to test. If you uncheck this, the pivot comes to the center of the object, however, based on the modeling. So for now, I'm gonna check this, all right? So the pivot is gonna be exactly the position where it came from the 3ds Max, okay? Let's export this again, okay? All right, file. Let's save it here. Yeah, that's it. And import. Okay. Look, I'm gonna leave it checked, so it's gonna consider the position that is coming from Max. And import. Okay, it came here. Let's put in the scene. Look at this. The pivot is there. That's not cool, right? All right then, so how can I adjust the pivot here on Unreal Engine? Same thing. Let's go in modeling, okay, the options here, and let's go, let's see, here, transform, pivot. Look at this. By clicking on pivot, we can align the pivot in some positions, or manually, okay, we can do it. We can put the pivot where we want. For example, here, you know, close to the object, or here, or I can click on center, and the pivot is going to center. Bottom, okay, it goes here. What is really nice? Top, left, right, back, front, you know? So in this module, we want to align this bottom, okay? And accept this. Yeah, nice, it's ready. The pivot of our model came from that wrong position, and now it's aligned in the center of the object. All right. Every furniture, armchair, all of this is gonna come with the pivot aligned here. Okay, the center of the object in bottom is gonna align here on this part, okay, of our model, and that's really nice. If you don't have this resource on your software, you can adjust the pivot here inside Unreal Engine. Now let's talk about how to flip the normal, how to invert, how to flip the normal. Maybe in the software that you're used to use, mainly on some modelings of SketchUp, when you bring this model inside Unreal Engine, the normal comes flipped, like inverted. What's that? Well, look, I'm gonna show it to you. So like this, and I'm gonna flip the seat, okay? Look at this, the normal of the seat. What is that? Well, it means that this part of the surface of my model is inverted, it's flipped. So instead of seeing my model here, it's like I'm seeing my model, the surface of this model here, this side. So it's inverted, Okay, I'm going to export the model. I'm going to call this flipped, and I'm going to save it. Nice. I'm going to import. Okay, import. Take to the scene. Look at this. You can see that we don't see the seat here because it's flipped. And besides flipped, the pivot is in the wrong position. We already learned how to correct the pivot. It's very simple. All right, pivot, bottom, accept. We correct the pivot. Now we're going to correct the normal that is flipped. Look at this. I see this here. Okay, I see it flipped. How we can correct this? Well, we select the object here, this one. I click on this element here. So I have these options, and I can choose, for example, some selection modes. For example, brush. I can select specific faces of my model. I can change, for example, this one, or this one, or all in group. Okay, I can select, for example, elements, specific elements of my model. Okay, do you agree that this element is with the face correct? The normal is not inverted. The only normal that is inverted is the normal of the seat. So I select this and I click flip normal. Yeah, that's it. The normal was corrected. Do you want to flip the normal? You click here. Look, the normal now is flipped. So click here, flip normal. Okay? Flip normals. Click on the element, flip normals. Alright? I'm going to close it here. Don't forget to accept. Yeah, that's it. Our model was corrected and the normal was corrected. Not only in the scene, as in the main model. Okay? Every time you put in the scene, the normal is going to be corrected and the pivot is going to be corrected. And if you need to adjust the mapping, the UV, the mapping is going to be corrected. Okay? I hope you liked this class, these tips. And in this class, we saw how to correct the pivot, correct the mapping, the UV, and how to flip the normal. So if you are following the course with some personal project in parallel to develop the knowledge of the course, you can use these resources here in case you don't use 3D Studio Max. Okay? By using 3D Studio Max is one of the ways to do it, as we are already modeling this. So you can model thinking about Unreal Engine. But in case you received the project from another artist and these concepts weren't think like when it was being building, you can adapt this inside Unreal Engine. Okay, so I'm gonna close this class here and we're gonna keep going with our course. See you. Bye.